Hi there, Amir here. Today I'm going to show you how Gigperformer can be your amp and effects chain for performing live. By default you start up in Rackspace view and you get two views, the front and the back that you see here, and this is where you set up your plugins. There's also a song setup and a tuner, but I'm not going to go into those today. So let's start creating a Rackspace. Just going to change the name. And note that for each Rackspace you also have what they call a variation, and I'm going to go into that later on. So let's start. So we add a positive grid bias amp 2 plugin. We want that to be our main amp for clean sound. So let's do that. I'm going to go with a tweed amp that I set up earlier. And now that I have my plugin, I'm going to make connection between the audio in and the plugin and onto the audio out. And this is basically how you add all your plugins. So you have a compressor here, a Rough Rider 3, we're going to add that at the top of the chain, and then we're going to add some Valhalla supermassive effects as well. Let's just speed this up a little bit. Okay, so now what you'll be seeing me doing is just add some effects. I love the Valhalla Supermassive plugin. It's great for reverbs and delays. I'm just going to connect that. And note that I've added a delay as well now, also a supermassive. Now we're going to just have a look at the Greed Smasher overdrive pedal from Mercurial. Just switch some things on and off. Okay, so now we have one Rackspace filled with effects and amps, and now we want to create another Rackspace, and this time we're going to do a completely different setup. It's going to be a lot smaller. We're just going to insert one amp, that is the neural DSP Archetype Nolly, and since the Nolly has quite a few effects of its own, delays and reverbs and overdrives, and a compressor, we're just going to have everything in this Rackspace just be inside Nolly. So let's set that up. Okay, so now we have two Rackspaces. Note that you could actually set the maximum tail length of each rackspace if you want to go between rackspaces and have a smooth transition. Note the orange connector at the top left. If you have a plugin that is controllable by MIDI, you can actually make a connection to the MIDI in and have it control the plugin directly, but I'm not going to do that in this demo. Okay, so now we're going to do a variation of the first clean amp rackspace setting. And a variation is just what it sounds like. It is basically a setting where you're using the same plugins, the same amps, but you can switch things on and off. So you have two different sounds. You could have one very light clean sound, you could have one with delay and modulation going on as well. So I'm just going to set that up here. Okay, so you're hearing the same sound on the two variations right now, and I'm going to get into that in a moment. Let's just change some program change numbers, so we can have the clean on 1 and 2 and the overdrive on 3, and later on we'll do a 4 as well. Okay, so now we need to go into the front view of the rack panel. For us to be able to make two variations using the same effects, we need to somehow tell the variations which effects to turn on and off, and that for that we need some controls that can toggle effects on and off, and some volume pots that can change the volume if we need to, the drive, the feedback level, and this is what the front view of the rack panels is for. Okay, so what you saw here was basically that when going to variation number 1, I would have to boost off, and when going to variation 2, I would have to boost on. And now let's do the same for the delay. I want the delay to be switched on in variation 2 and have it off in variation 1. When you set up controls, you can actually use some functions to make them the same size and distribute them evenly across a 1 unit or 2 unit space, or 3 or 4 units. Okay, so that's set up now. So now I'm going to do a variation on the boosted sound, the crunch amp sound, and I'm going to have an overdrive channel on program change 3 and a lead with delay on program change 4. Okay, so again I'm going to speed this up. I'm going to have an overdrive connected to a switch on the rack unit, and I'm going to also have the drive control being controlled by the rack panel, and that's very easy to set up. Just use the learn parameter to click on the controls inside the plugin, and you're set to go. Okay, let's finish our rack panel. We want to be able to control the delay on the Nolly as well, switch it on and off, and we want to have a caption so we can clearly see which effect the toggle switch is actually controlling. So that's what we did here. Just make some changes to the captions. Okay, so now we can switch between two overdrive settings, so let's test everything. Here we go. Okay, so everything is working fine. We saved the gig file, and now we're going to start all over. And this time I'm going to do something a bit different. Instead of having different rack spaces, I'm going to have one rack space with 4 variations, and I'm going to set up 3 different amps for this rack space. And note that I removed the midi in controller because I'm not using it. Everything is done by setting it up inside rack panels. So this rack space will be set up with an overdrive pedal. We're going to have a compressor pedal, and we're going to use 3 amps. Actually, we're going to use 2 different amps, but where we are only going to use the positive grid bias amp 2 amp once, we're going to make 2 copies of the Nolly amp because I really like the Nolly amp for both clean, crunchy and very distorted sounds. So I'm going to have 2 instances of this. But first we set up the bias amp. Just show it on the left side. Then we're going to add the Nolly. You may notice that once in a while I'm using the audio unit version of a plugin, sometimes the VST3 or the VST. There aren't really any rules for this. I plan it as I go, and things I've heard is that the VST plugins are quite effective in the version 3, so I've started using those more and more. And that's the first Archetype Nolly amp, and I'm just going to make one more and line them up. This one will have Organia sound. Just make sure that no effects that I don't want on are turned on. And the caps on, great. So now we have 3 amps set up side by side. So now we do some connections between the different units. And the thing is, when our audio in should go into 2 parts, and then the one path will be the clean amp, the second one will be the distorted setups, and the distorted setups I want to use with the Grid Smasher overdrive plugin, but I don't want it on the clean sound, and I don't want the compressor on the distorted sounds. That's why I'm making 2 parts here. Okay, so what you just heard was actually me going through all 3 amps at the same time. And you can do that. You could make a 2 amp setup where you have 2 clean amps on, let's say a Vox type and a Fender type, or a Marshall type and a Boogie type. And you could have them on at the same time, but that's of no use to us if we want to switch between the sounds. So what we're going to do here is we've just added an audio mixer. And what an audio mixer is really just a mixer where you can route your different audio signals. And let's say in this situation we have 3 stereo outs from 3 amps going into the mixer, and then we have a stereo out from the mixer to the audio interface. And I'm just going to do a little bit of bus layout modifications. You don't need to, but if you only want a mono input or mono output, you may as well just set it up so you don't have too many connectors that you don't know why you have. So almost done. So right now we actually have a 3 amp setup, and we can control the output with the faders on the mixer. Let's just save this gig file so it doesn't disappear. Remember to save once in a while as you go along. So you still have all 3 amps on. Okay, so what you saw is me controlling the faders to turn amps on and off, using the mute function or solo functions, and the volume faders themselves. So now we have our 3 amps set up, and what we want is we want the different variations to use only 1 amp at a time. I could use 2, and I could have even a more elaborate setup, but I'm going to keep this simple for this demo. I'm going to set up a rack panel with 3 switches, 1 for each amp. And what I'm doing right now is I'm saying, okay, this switch should control the channel mute function on channel 1 and 2. And channel 1 and 2 is set up to take the input of the bias amp, tweet amp. So that'll be our clean sound. We can switch on and off here. And we're going to do the same with the other 2 amps. Note how I'm actually using the learn parameter to set up the mute function on the faders. It's much easier. Okay, so now I'm going to add some more effects. I'm going to use the Valhalla Supermassive again, and I want 1 reverb at the end of the chain. So I'm just going to set that up here. And of course you don't hear anything because it's not connected yet, so we connect it on the other side of the audio mixer. So everything goes through this supermassive reverb, and then you get something like this. Okay, so something is not quite right. The lead sound is not using the right amp, so I'm just going to fix that. Okay, so I made some changes. Now let's test the amps. Okay, so the basic routing of the amp seems to be in place now. So now we want to add a new panel for controlling our delay. And I've added a supermassive delay at the end of the chain. And I'm also going to use the delay inside the Archetype Nolly amp. And this can be done very easily, but to make it clear which delay is, which switch is controlling which delay, I'm going to add some captions to the toggle switch. Yeah, let's use the toggle switch, this one. And I'm just going to choose the supermassive, say bar pass, and then I'm going to invert the value because when you use the bypass plugin setting, you actually, when you switch it on, you actually bypass it, but you want it the other way around. So let's make another delay control with a caption here. And you can copy and paste controls as you go along if you don't want to start all over. This way you have the same size for the new control. And this time I'm using the learn parameter to switch the delay on and off, to teach it how to do it. Note that if you click the learn parameter, it's actually working until you unclick it again. And this time I'm going with the delay 2 for the lead sound. So I'm using the delay 1 for the crunch and delay 2 for the lead. That means that I need separate controls for them. Just change the captions. I'm doing this as we speak, and it's quite easy to change the setup. Here we go. So the clean is set up. So we have two clean sounds now. Okay, so let's just get delay 1 working on the crunch channel. Doesn't seem to work right now. Let's go into the designer. And note that we are using the delay 1 active parameter inside Nolly, and that is why you don't want the value inverted. Only use the inverted if you're using the bypass plugin setting. So now it's working. Okay, so now we're just going to do a few changes to the delay 2 setting. The main exercise here is we just want it to be very clear that the delay is on. So now that it's on, let's finish setting up our control panels, switch things off you don't need, just to make it more clear what is actually on. Clean first. So far so good, the clean is working. One thing I did forget was that I wanted a chorus effect, some modulation, and I'm using the Mercurial chorus, WS1, which I'm going to insert into the clean path. And I can highly recommend Mercurial's effects. They're really easy to use, and they look just like your regular stump pedals. And just make a mono. But of course, just adding the pedal itself will mean that if you switch it on, you'll have it on both variations of clean sound, and we don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a switch to the top panel. We don't need another panel for this function. So here's the toggle switch. Just use the bypass plugin with the inverted value. Change the caption. And that's really it. We have a chorus pedal in our setup. Yeah, so let's just test the setup. Okay, so everything works, and I know that some of the sounds were over-exaggerated, but it was just to make a point so you could clearly hear what is going in and out. And this has been fun. This is a fantastic piece of software, and you always have to remember that if you want to have it MIDI controllable by using your favorite MIDI controller, which I'm setting up right now, MIDI controllers are very different from each other, and the one I'm using right now is a one-way MIDI controller, so some things are not ideal. It's the Harley Benton MP100, also known as the Mellow MIDI commander. But use the settings and the learn parameter buttons to find out how to control your effects properly. And right now I'm actually setting up a possibility of sending a CC code, because I want to be able to switch effects on and off. So what I'm doing here is actually teaching the system how to switch an effect on and off without making a program change. This way you could have, for example, 4 program changes at the bottom of your pedal board and 4 effects on-off switches at the top if you had 8 switches. It's a very flexible setup. So I'm turning the chorus on and off here just by pressing a pedal. Note how the effects are being switched on and off without actually having a program change. That's all. I hope you enjoyed this, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks. Have a great day.